Hi, everybody. I'm Pierre Bouvard, Chief Insights Officer here at the Audio Active Group at Cumulus Media in Westwood One. And as podcasts have now become simulcast on YouTube, the natural questions advertisers are asking is the sales effect of the audio version of the podcast the same as the sales effect of the YouTube podcast version? Well, according to a brand new study from Podscribe at Oxford Road, the answer to that question is no. In fact, when you look at podcast sales effect, the audio ads beat the YouTube video ads in effectiveness. Now, how much? Oh, by quite a bit. The Oxford Road Podscribe study revealed that podcast views on the YouTube version, the YouTube simulcast, are 18 to 25% less effective at driving purchases than the audio podcast ads. Now, don't be shocked. Don't be stunned. This is just the first in a series of studies over the last couple of years that have revealed the sales effect of audio is greater than the sales effect of video. Now, why are audio ads more effective? People are more engaged, and the evidence for this comes from a scientific study published in Nature that examined the Game of Thrones audiobook and the Game of Thrones TV show. Half the consumers were exposed to one and the other, and the audio version, where people had to lean in and imagine, had much, much more engagement. And that's really why those podcast audio ads outperform the podcast YouTube version. Adelaide, one of the leaders in attentiveness measurement, reveals that despite lacking sight and motion, audio platforms generate very similar attentiveness levels to television. Lumen, another major player in attentiveness measurement, finds that audio ads outperform video for both attention and brand recall. And a new audio branding study and a video branding study that was conducted on a series of TV ads by DVJ Insights found that you can look away, but you can't shut your ears. What they found was the audio brand mentions is the key driver of brand recall in TV ads, much more powerful than putting up the visual logo in the TV ad. And all of this evidence leads to this major study from WPP Media, which examined short-term ROI defined as 13 weeks. And what they found is that digital audio, defined as podcast or streaming, leads the world, tied for first in short-term ROI, and number two is AM and FM radio. So the Podscribe study, they are a leading audio attribution company. They partnered with Oxford Road, which is one of the leading audio specialist agencies. It was a significant study. First of a kind study. It examined over 1,000 podcast campaigns across over 100 brands. And the stark conclusion is that if you're spending about $1 million in YouTube podcast impressions, you're losing up to $250,000 of conversion value compared to the audio version of the podcast. So what's going on here? Why is it that the same podcast is so much more effective in the audio version versus the video version? Well, the team at Podscribe and Oxford Road offer these three explanations. First, audio listeners are intentional. The YouTube viewers are passive and algorithm driven. The audio listener seeks out the content intentionally. There are strong host connections. The YouTube version, more disengaged, more passive, more algorithmic driven, and that reduces ad impact. The audio first mindset is more effective. When people are listening to audio podcasts, as we saw in the Game of Thrones Nature magazine study, they are more focused. They're listening, they're leaning in, they're listening to the host's voice, the host recommendations. It creates a more persuasive and intimate environment for the advertiser. And lastly, YouTube audience simply don't pay as much attention. Viewers could be multitasking. The visual element could be distracting from the core podcast content and sponsor messaging, making it feel less personal. So we mentioned this major study on Game of Thrones. They published this in Nature magazine. Consumers had sensors placed at their wrist, measuring a series of things that define engagement: heart rate, electrodermal activity, and body temperature. And what they found was that, not surprisingly, people are much more cognitively and emotionally engaged with the audiobook version versus the TV show. The spoken narratives require people to be actively engaged, where the videos leave nothing to the imagination, and you can be much more distracted and passive. The pictures in the listeners' minds, they say, might not be as vivid or as detailed, but the imaginative generation that these images require generates greater cognition, greater emotional processing, and so they're just simply more engaging. So Adelaide, one of the leaders in attentiveness measurement, rates media based on an attentiveness score called the AU score. It's a quality rating to better predict campaign outcomes. And they have a lot of data that correlates the AU score to things like driving awareness, consideration, purchase conversion, and ROI. And so when you array out a whole series of media with their AU score, you can see the three flavors of audio, podcast, streaming, and radio perform exceptionally well, beating the vast majority of digital platforms. What you can do with this data is say, okay, if I had $1,000 of radio, how much would I have to buy in Facebook ads to get the same amount of attentiveness? And as you can see, $1,000 in radio, you'd have to spend $2,600, 2.5 times more in Facebook. And look at all of these digital platforms that people pay so much less attention to. So you have to buy a lot more of it to get the same impact as an audio format. Now, in 2023, a major study from Dentsu, the leading media agency partnering with Lumen, one of the attentiveness measurement leaders, found that audio attention and brand equity are comparable to visual media, and that audio is more cost efficient. So they found, when they calculated something called attentiveness seconds, audio blew out all other media, generated greater brand recall. And they calculate something called an attentiveness CPM, which is, what does it cost to buy 1,000 seconds of attentiveness? And what you can see, the most expensive media you can buy are banner ads. Barely anybody looks at them, so it costs you a fortune to get people's attention with banner ads. All the way to the left there, you can see the most cost-effective media platforms in attentiveness CPM: audio, podcast, and radio. Now, the $25 podcast CPM, when you measure it with an attention CPM, it's only $2.80, and radio is stunningly affordable when looked through the lens of the attention CPM. Now, the Advertising Research Foundation defines advertising attentiveness as the degree to which folks exposed to the advertising are focused on it. The Association of National Advertisers created this 3-step attention pathway: getting noticed, holding attention, and impacting memory. Now, the first part of the attention pathway really is, how good is the media at driving noticed, getting people aware of the ad. And then as you get to impacting memory, that really becomes the job of the quality of the creative at driving brand linkage and purchase intention. Now, is attentiveness something that is of importance to advertisers and agencies? We have put that question to 300 media agencies and advertisers through Advertiser Perceptions over the last 5 years, and the answer is yes. Since 2021, the proportion of marketers and media agencies indicating that attentiveness is a good media effectiveness metric that has grown from 67% 5 years ago to 82% as of just a month ago. And when asked, do they consider podcasting to have strong attentiveness, marketers and media agents say absolutely yes. They see podcasting as a very attentive platform. And that is borne out by this survey from Maru Matchbox. Interestingly, marketers and media agencies underestimate the attentiveness of AM and FM radio. Now, a great example of the power of audio comes from this major TV study that was conducted by DVJ Insights. And they wanted to look at brand building, brand recall, and how many times the visual logo appeared in the TV ad and how many times the name of the brand appeared in the audio track. And so they had versions where there was one visual logo all the way up to 7, and then there was versions where they had one audio brand mention and the audio track up to 6. And they wanted to see which combination of visual branding or audio branding generated the strongest brand recall. So across the bottom here, you have the number of either visual logos appearing in the ad, and then you have the number of audio brand mentions in the audio track. The gray line represents the brand recall generated by the video logos, and the blue line represents the brand recall generated by the audio brand mentions. So let's look at that gray line, which is the number of visual audio logos in the TV ad. So with one visual brand in that ad, you get about a 28% brand recall. You go all the way out to 7 visual logo flashes in the TV ad, and you only add another 9 points of brand recall. So, but look at that audio line. When you go from 1 to 6 audio brand mentions in the audio track of the TV ad, brand recall goes through the roof. So in TV ads, audio does all the heavy lifting. So a creative best practice, brand early, brand often with audio mentions. Now, all of this leads up to a major study released last year from WPP Media and Radio Center in the UK, which reveals that digital audio in all of its flavors, podcast and streaming, and radio performs exceptionally well in short-term ROI, defined as 13 weeks. So the WPP study wanted to tease out the sales effect of radio from that of digital audio. They wanted to look at both 13-week ROI and then 2-year ROI. And they wanted to compare it across a wide variety of media. The source data set was a major study involving hundreds of brands globally called Profitability 2. They found 7 brands where the media mix modeling had generated ROIs for the various audio platforms. These brands covered 4 different sectors, and you can see a wide variety of media were used. Audio, especially digital audio, did exceptionally well in short-term ROI. In fact, tied for first was podcast and audio streaming. Number 2 was AM and FM radio. And as you can see, audio outperforming all forms of video in short-term sales effect. So a lot of evidence coming out in the last couple of years revealing that the audio is really the major sales driver versus video. The very latest study to come out is this Oxford Road Podscribe study that examined over 1,000 campaigns, over 100 brands, and found that the YouTube podcast views 18 to 25% less effective at driving purchases versus the audio. The Game of Thrones study explains why. There was folks exposed to the audiobook, those exposed to the TV show, those exposed to the audiobook were simply more engaged. You have to actively participate and imagine, and the video narrative leaves very little to the imagination, resulting in a more passive, less engaged consumer. Adelaide, a leader in attentiveness measurement, shows that despite not having sight and motion, audio attentiveness performs exceptionally well versus video. Lumen, also a leader in attentiveness measurement, finding that audio ads actually outperform video for attention and brand recall. The DVJ Insight study, which looked at number of brand mentions, whether audio or video, clearly said audio does all the heavy lifting in brand association in video ads. So brand early and often is the creative best practice. And what we mean by that is say your name early and often in your video, in your TV, and your audio ads. And all of this leads to the WPP Media study that recently came out last year that showed that digital audio short-term ROI tied for first, and AM and FM radio is second, beating video formats. So what are the implications here? Well, no doubt, due to the stronger effectiveness of the audio version versus the video version of podcasts, higher audio podcast CPMs are warranted. We also saw through the attentiveness data that traditional media impressions are simply worth more than digital impressions, which have a high level of distraction. Higher CPMs for podcasts overall are warranted throughout all of these studies, and a creative best practice, brand early and often with audio brand mentions to drive your brand recall. The Audio Active Group here at Cumulus Media in Westwood One is a full service national audio advisory for marketers and media agencies. We conduct a large number of measurement studies for our clients, whether it's brand lift, sales effects, search and site attribution, as well as a ton of creative pre-testing. Each and every week, we publish a new audio insight and case study. You can find it on our blog, the Audio Active blog, which is available at cumulusmedia.com or westwood1.com. And when you're there, you can sign up to get our free weekly email of the audio case study. Thanks so much for the opportunity to review the just released Podscribe and Oxford Road attentiveness study, and all of the other major studies that have revealed that audio trumps video in sales effect. Thanks so much.